The riddle of the two cartridges. Imagine a world where two completely different bullets lie on the military's table. On one side, there's a powerful, long, spear-like rifle cartridge. It flies far, far away, hits hard and accurately. But it has a huge drawback. Weapons for it are typically long and heavy rifles that, when fired in bursts, dance in your hands like they're possessed, and getting more than one accurate shot per second from them is a real challenge. It is a weapon of distance, a sniper's weapon, but not a weapon for close combat. On the other side is the modest, short pistol cartridge. It is the soul of all submachine guns, those very schmeissers we so often see in movies. Weapons for it are compact, light. You can fire bursts from them without fear of being spun around 360 degrees. Perfect for urban combat, storming trenches, close quarters. But its weakness is like that of a small dog that barks loudly but can't deliver a serious bite. It loses power at just 200 or 300 meters, and against a soldier in a thick overcoat or behind a shield, it is almost helpless. And so, in the late 30s, German generals and engineers sat and racked their brains. War is not a duel at a distance of 1 kilometer, nor is it point-blank shooting in a trench. War is all of that together. An infantryman needs a universal weapon to reach the enemy at medium distances in an open field and in the city in a house, not to catch the barrel on door frames, and for the impact to be strong enough that the enemy falls and doesn't get up. And then a brilliant idea, as it now seems, was born. What if we find a golden mean? Create a cartridge that is not as powerful as a rifle cartridge, but not as weak as a pistol cartridge? An intermediate one. It would give the weapon both range and power, while allowing it to remain light, controllable in automatic fire, and cheap to produce. Thus began the path to the legend, to the weapon that some simply call the StG-44, while others refer to it with respect as the father of all assault rifles. This is not just a story about a piece of metal. This is a story about how one idea can turn all military science upside down, influencing the armies of the entire world for decades to come. Stay tuned. The most interesting part is ahead. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next episodes where we'll break down other legendary weapons. Part 1. The birth of an idea. Who invented the golden bullet? Any great invention needs a prophet, a person who sees what others do not. In our story, this prophet was Engineer Colonel Friedrich Kittel. Imagine not a theoretical desk worker, but a practitioner, a referent from the Wehrmacht's weapons office. A man who knew the soldiers' needs firsthand. Since April 1935, he had been thinking about how to make the German infantrymen more lethal and effective. It was his mind that gave birth to that very final concept. He formulated the technical specifications for a round that did not yet exist. A bullet of approximately 7 to 8 millimeters in caliber was needed, but with a shortened case. This reduced the powder charge, reduced recoil, but retained sufficient energy to hit targets at distances up to 500 or 600 meters. And this, as combat statistics showed, was precisely the distance at which most infantry fire contacts occurred. But ideas alone are not enough. Hands were needed. And here fate brought Kittel together with the Pulte Company from Magdeburg. As early as 1938, almost in secret, Pulte's engineers were struggling with a similar task. They created a project for a 7.92 millimeter cartridge, but with a case only 30 millimeters long. It was their own private project, and when the Army showed interest, the stars aligned. After many tests, trials, and errors, by 1941, that famous 7.92 by 33 millimeter Kurz short was born. It was a masterpiece of engineering. A bullet weighing 8.2 grams flew out of the barrel at a speed of almost 700 meters per second. It was ideal, more powerful than a pistol cartridge, but more compact and with less recoil than a rifle cartridge. The golden mean had been found. Now a weapon for it needed to be created. And here begins a detective story with competitors, intrigues, and the deception of the Führer himself. Part 2. Battle of the Titans. Schmeisser versus Walther. With the cartridge's appearance, the weapons department sent the technical specifications to the best German arms companies. The main rivals in this race were two legends, the CG Henkel Company led by Hugo Schmeisser and the Karl Walther GmbH Company. Imagine this situation. Two masters, two geniuses of design thought. Schmeisser, already famous, the creator of the MP-28 and MP-41, the progenitor of that very image of the SS officer with a Schmeisser. A man with vast experience. His approach was as simple as a hammer, reliability above all. A soldier's weapon must work in mud, snow, and sand. It must be simple to produce and maintain. Walther, that was aristocracy. Fine, precise, almost jewelry-like work. Their weapons were often more elegant, technological, with a pretense of elitism. They were confident of their victory, relying on their scientific potential and powerful production lines. In early 1942, both presented their prototypes. They received dry army indices, MKB-42H from Henkel and MKB-42W from Walther. What were these models like? Schmeisser's MKB-42 used a scheme with gas operation via a port in the barrel. This wasn't a completely new idea, but the Germans had long been wary of it, fearing complexity. However, Schmeisser proved it was a workable and reliable system. His automatic carbine was as sturdy as a rock. The Walther model was more elegant, lighter, better balanced, but its mechanism was more complex. Too many small parts that could get clogged or break in the harsh conditions of the Eastern Front, where frost reached -40 and dust and dirt were everywhere. Field tests put everything in its place. The soldiers wanted a weapon that fired, not one that needed constant cleaning. Schmeisser won. His MKB-42H was recognized as more promising. But the story didn't end there. It only took a political twist. Part 3, a cunning maneuver. How they tricked Hitler. And here begins a real spy novel. It would seem the weapon is tested, the army needs it, put into production. But there was one huge problem in the way: Adolf Hitler himself. The Führer was a man of old views in military matters. He viewed new types of weapons with suspicion, especially if they called existing stocks into question. And in the warehouses of the Third Reich lay many millions of standard 7.92 by 57mm rifle cartridges. Hitler believed that creating a new cartridge was madness, a waste of resources, and a blow to their own logistics. Why do we need this when we have mountains of excellent cartridges? That was roughly his logic. He categorically forbade the development of the new automatic carbine. It seemed the project was buried. But the German generals and armaments minister Albert Speer were not the type to give up easily. They resorted to a brilliant, though risky, trick. They simply renamed the weapon. The MKB-42H became the MP-43. The abbreviation MP stood for Maschinen Pistol, that is submachine gun. Hitler looked favorably on submachine guns. They were associated with mobile assault troops. He was told that this was merely a new, improved model of submachine gun, and he authorized its limited production. It was a brilliant move. The weapon, under its new name MP-43, went to the front, primarily to the elite units of the Wehrmacht and Waffen-SS. And there it caused a furor. Here is an excerpt from that very report by Junior Corporal Schoenberg from August 7th, 1943, quoted in the original text. He doesn't just praise the new item. He conducts a detailed comparative analysis, like the best product manager. Whereas with the Karabiner 98K, you need to reload the weapon after every shot. You can fire 30 shots without reloading. This increases the firepower of the group and makes it harder for the enemy to approach our position. If the Karabiner 98K were replaced by the MP-43, it would be advisable to introduce more rifles with optical sights to effectively combat the enemy even at distances over 300 meters. The frontline soldiers understood the main thing. This was a weapon of a new generation. It gave a poorly trained soldier the firepower of a machine gun while retaining the accuracy of a rifle. When enthusiastic reports went directly to Hitler, he had no choice but to accept the accomplished fact. In 1944, the weapon received its legitimate and famous name, Sturmgewehr 44, that is, Assault Rifle Model 1944. Thus, a legend was born. Economic background. The war machine at its limit. Now let's look at this story from another angle. the economic one. The creation of the StG-44 is not only a triumph of engineering thought, but also a story about the incredible strain on all of Germany's industry. By 1943, the war for Germany had become a war of attrition. Industry was operating at its limit, under constant bombardment by Allied aviation. Every machine tool, every kilogram of steel, every working hour was accounted for. The production of the StG-44 was established under the most difficult conditions. Advanced but expensive technologies were used for its creation. For example, a significant part of the parts was manufactured by stamping, not milling. This sped up the process and saved metal, but required complex press forms and precise quality control. Let's think about the numbers. In total, about 450,000 units of the StG-44 were produced during the war. Does that number seem huge? But let's compare. The famous MP-40 submachine gun was produced in quantities of over 1 million, and the Soviet PPSH-41, over 6 million. The Mauser 98K rifle, a full 14 million. Why is that? The StG-44 was technologically more complex and expensive. According to some estimates, its production cost 1.5 to 2 times more than the MP-40. And most importantly, there was no time left for its full-scale deployment. The Allies were bombing factories, resources were scarce. This is the paradox. Germany created the weapon of the future, but its economy could no longer provide it to the entire army in the required quantities. The StG-44 became an elite weapon, a symbol of technical superiority that could no longer turn the tide of the war. It was like a supercar being built in a garage while the whole city was burning. Brilliant, but already useless for the overall victory. Part 4. The Legacy. How the German rifle conquered the world. The fall of the Third Reich in 1945 was not the end for the StG-44. On the contrary, it was only the beginning of its world career. Captured Sturmgewehrs were studied with interest by the victors, the USSR and the USA. Holding the StG-44 in their hands, Soviet engineers understood the correctness of the path they had chosen. Mikhail Kalashnikov, of course, did not create his AK-47 as a copy of the German rifle. They're structurally very different, but the very concept of the intermediate cartridge was directly inherited. The Soviet 7.62 by 39mm cartridge, created a little earlier, received powerful confirmation of its correctness. The AK-47 became a symbol for half the world, just as the American M16 became for the other half. And all of them are the spiritual heirs of that very idea of Kittel and Schmeisser. But the most amazing transformation happened in the West. Remember the designer Ludwig Vorbrumler? He worked on a simplified version, the StG-45. After the war, he, like many German specialists, was taken to France and then moved to Spain. There, at the Setme company, based on his developments, he created a new rifle, the Setme Model A. And then, a fantastic turn. The German company Heckler & Koch, founded, by the way, by former engineers from the Mauser plant, bought the license for this Spanish rifle, and on its basis created the famous H and KG3, which became the main rifle of the Bundeswehr, the army of the new, democratic Germany. Imagine the irony. The brainchild of Nazi engineers, refined in Spain, returned to Germany and became the weapon of its new army. A whole family of H and K weapons was born from the G3, the famous MP5, G36, and many others. All of them, in essence, carry a piece of the DNA of that very StG-44. Thus, the German invention, having lost the war, won the global arms race, defining the appearance of small arms for the second half of the 20th century. The lessons of one rifle. So why is the history of the StG-44 so important even today, almost 80 years later? It teaches us several simple but brilliant things. First, the importance of the right idea. Not the most complex, not the most powerful, but the right one. The idea of an intermediate cartridge and a universal weapon for it proved to be so correct that it remains the standard for all the world's armies to this day. From the American M4 to the Russian AK-12, they are all assault rifles, heirs to that very concept. Second, pragmatism. The German engineers were not trying to create an ideal. They were creating a tool to solve the specific problems of the common soldier. They thought about convenience, reliability, cost, and simplicity. This is a lesson for any engineer. The best product is the one that does its job best, not the one with the most bells and whistles. Third, persistence. The story of the renaming to MP43 shows, if you're confident in your rightness, sometimes you need to show flexibility and ingenuity to get around stupid obstacles. Don't give up, look for workarounds. The Sturmgewehr 44 is not just a piece of metal. It is a symbol of the transition from the era of long rifles to the era of automatic weapons. It is a bridge between the world of yesterday and the world of today. It is the story of how a brilliant thought, born in the fire of the most terrible war, was able to outlive its creators and change the future. That's all, friends. I hope you found it as interesting as I did. This topic is bottomless. We can talk about specific modifications, combat use, and what happened to Hugo Schmeisser after the war. Write in the comments, what other legendary weapons do you want to learn about? The Kalashnikov assault rifle? The M16? Or maybe something more exotic? Your likes and subscriptions are the best motivation to dig deeper and prepare new interesting material for you. Right, let's discuss. See you soon.